Well, I certainly believe that investigators in this case are very far down the road. In other words, I think that they have been able to look at a extensive amount of digital information from electronic devices of Brad's. I also think they have looked closely at other devices in the home. I think they have conducted extensive interviews with individuals that we don't know about in the public light, but that have been conducted. I think that they are close. I really believed, based on their statements, that they thought they would find either Suzanne or indicia of the crime at that landfill. Now, I will say the amount of time they were there, very short when you consider a landfill search. Usually those kinds of searches take weeks and weeks. So I'm thinking that perhaps their investigation turned them in another direction, but certainly was disappointed, like many others, to not see any fruits from all of that labor hunting in that landfill. Will they ever find her? That is going to be the interesting question. I think based on the fact that now we have an accomplice, at least an accomplice involved in hiding a weapon. And could that weapon have been used in this, what I believe to be the murder of Suzanne? Could that have been used? I think it's very likely. Why else would he go to the lengths to hide this particular gun, yet keep in his possession a gun that he was illegally owning, as it was too short barreled?
And that's, I spoke to an attorney yesterday, and she seems to think that, right, Brad Simpson has not spoken to police. He doesn't appear to be wanting to obviously speak to police now. What are your thoughts on that and how that may have helped or hurt the case? Obviously, it's hurt the case, but helped him.
In my experience, when spouses or loved ones, people that should be in a position to know what happened to the individual, refuse to speak and cooperate with authorities, it's a huge red flag. That is just not normally how innocent people react to such a situation. They want to help. Even if they get attorneys, they still want to help and provide information. When they were last seen, they're typically extremely upset and concerned for their loved one. So the bottom line is the actions of Brad have helped point, I think, law enforcement in his direction.
Do you feel as if it seems like investigators seem to be at square one because nothing was found at the landfill, even though the chief had released a statement saying he felt very confident that something, Suzanne, would be recovered there. Do you feel that they're kind of losing ground or grasping at straws maybe because uh, people think it's not happening fast enough, but really in your experience, all of this just takes time.
So I think from the public's point of view, wow, they had this great tip and they were searching in this landfill. And then when nothing was found and law enforcement had to come back and say, we found nothing, it looks as if sort of the brakes were put on this investigation and maybe they took two steps back. But I would argue no. I think behind the scenes, there is so much going on that, of course, the public doesn't see. And I think the investigation is progressing nicely. I base that in part on the arrest that took place yesterday. That tells me they're honing in. They knew a gun was missing, I believe, from photos that were taken, and they knew that they needed to find where or who was responsible for hiding it. Again, they looked at that digital information they had, and there's going to be more. I believe they'll be looking at Google searches. What did possibly they glean from the Google search that led them to that landfill? Unfortunately, the search warrant is sealed, but did Brad do Google searches that led them to that landfill? Something led investigators there because they didn't just search willy-nilly on a tip. They prepared what's called a probable cause affidavit. And that was necessary to search here in full and would have had to have been signed off on by a judge. So clearly, there was information they had. I do have concern that was that landfill search complete. Um, they used cadets, brand new, really people with very little training and experience. That landfill search should have been conducted, in my opinion, by an experienced evidence response team, such as the evidence response team of the FBI, with very particularly trained cadaver dogs that could have helped expedite that search and conduct it more thoroughly. I do have concerns about that.
You mentioned red flags with Brad Simpson. What other red flags do you possibly see? Are some of the red flags maybe um, Brad's family not speaking? Do you see other red flags of just what else do you notice that is odd about this investigation?
Well, other red flags certainly are the fight that took place between Suzanne and Brad imminently before she went missing. Now, this is critical because it shows at least some history of domestic violence. And we know domestic violence often peaks with, unfortunately, that partner taking a mortal action against the person that they love. So that's another huge red flag. Another red flag was the fact that the vehicle of Brad was taken and returned later, right after this fight, and yet Suzanne was never seen again. That's a big red flag for authorities. In addition, very recently, Brad's brother, Bart, has come out and actually spoken against his own brother, intimating that, listen, we're going to be forthcoming, we're going to try to be truthful, and basically, my brother should be. I think that's very telling. It's very unusual for the family member to not stick by their loved one, by their own brother, unless they think that that person could possibly be involved.
And one last thing, your experience, you've lived in Texas, you understand basically the Texas culture here for a lot of the affluent communities. Uh, do you think that plays a part in this? Obviously, the Simpsons come from a very affluent area in San Antonio. Um, the neighborhood is very tight-lipped and very protective of the Simpson family, even though it seems as if maybe Brad may not have been doing very legal things inside of the home where small children live. Did that, do you think that's playing a lot in what investigators are looking at as well?
So it's very interesting when you have a dynamic like this sort of domestic violence and potential murder by a spouse of another spouse in an affluent community. I think many times we think of these sorts of crimes being, occurring in more impoverished type homes. But unfortunately, there is no line that draws a barrier when it comes to domestic violence. And so, whenever you have crimes like these possibly being committed in affluent areas, individual communities like that, those homeowners typically have their own lives they're leading very separately. The distances between houses are usually very great. The types of times that you might get together with your neighbors are rare compared to other closer, tighter knit communities. So I think it can have an effect in terms of how many neighbors will really know the intimate details of the relationship between Suzanne and Brad.
And I just lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
I just think it's very interesting, this whole case, how it's unfolding, and the case is just very fluid, and it just things keep changing every day with it. And I just can't seem to think of it. But I'm going to text you. I'm going to text you when it comes to me because I know that it's going to come to me, and I'm not going to have you on Zoom anymore. But I appreciate your time. I really do, and I think you lend a lot of insight to it having firsthand experience um, going through cases like this. Oh, this is what I was going to ask you. So yesterday when I was speaking to an attorney, she's a prosecutor and she was a defense attorney, but she believes that Brad Simpson was arrested too quickly. That maybe police didn't do a full investigation, didn't have enough evidence. They just wanted to arrest someone to kind of quiet the community, satisfy them. Do you think he was rushed in arrest?
Some people might think Brad Simpson was arrested just too quickly in a case like this. I would argue absolutely the opposite, and this is why. People involved in crimes like this have a propensity in some situations to be family annihilators. In other words, sometimes it's not enough for them to just take their spouse's life, but in fact, their whole world begins to crumble. We saw it in the affidavit, one of the text messages he wrote to his good friend, basically saying social media is, coming down on me. And you can kind of sense this feeling of complete isolation. And that becomes very critical because he has 4 children. So imagine if law enforcement would have allowed him to return to that family dynamic, and he would have sensed this desperateness that he could be sensing if he indeed killed his wife, and they could be endangered. So it was critical that law enforcement arrest him for the domestic violence altercation that they have a witness for and had probable cause to prove, plus the federal authorities putting that hold on him and then ultimately charging him and keeping him in jail on $1 million bond. These were all necessary, I believe, to protect the community and specifically his children.
That's interesting. I do agree with you. Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to add that I didn't ask you about this
I would
case?
I would simply add this. It's going to be very important for law enforcement to look at all the video cameras, whether they be ring footage, whether they be footage of lights, videos that are at intersections, any and all cameras from businesses, because where did he go in that time frame after the altercation and before she went missing? This is critical because Texas has amazing places, unfortunately, to hide individuals, to hide a body because of the landscape, because of the desolateness, really, in many places outside of San Antonio. So I think it's critical that they really concentrate on the video footage in and around that area.